Tonight's story is a bit long. It's called The Autumn Story. It was a fine autumn. The blackberries were ripe and the nuts were ready. It's autumn now. The mice at Brumbly Hedge were very busy. Every morning they went into the fields to gather seeds, berries and roots, which they took back to the store stump. Amid carefully, they would stow everything away for the winter. The store stump was warm inside and smelt delicious of brambly jelly and rising bread, and it was already nearly full of food. Lord Woodmouse, who lived in the old oak palace, was out early with his youngest daughter Primrose. "Now stay close to me," he said, "and don't get lost." As they made their way through the blackberry bushes, Primrose picked the berries nearest the ground while Dad hooked the upper branches down with his walking stick. The basket was nearly full when they were joined by Mrs. Eyebright. "I've been looking for you," she said. "Bad weather's on its way. I can feel it in my bones. We must finish our harvest before the rain begins." Lord Woodmouse sent Primrose back to the palace, and they went on to the store stump to find Mr. Apple making arrangements. Soon parties of mice with carts and wheelbarrows were hurrying into the fields to gather the last of the nuts and the berries. Lord and Lady Woodmouse decided to help pick mushrooms, and they were just setting off when Lady Woodmouse cried out in alarm, "Where's Primrose?" She was nowhere to be seen. She wasn't hiding in the baskets or under the leaves or in the long grass. "Has anyone seen Primrose?" shouted Lord Woodmouse. "She hasn't been here," said the mice gathering berries high in the blackthorn bush. "We haven't seen her," called the mice in the hawthorn bush. The children thought they saw her at grandmother's house, and a search party was sent to investigate. Hot and out of breath, they knocked at the door at Crabapple Cottage. "Have you seen Primrose?" said Wilfred. "We've lost her." Mrs. Apple shook her head and took off her apron and joined in the search, and Mr. Apple ran over to the gap in the hedge by the store stump. "Primrose, where are you?" he cried. "Primrose, where are you?" echoed the call across the cornfield. Lord and Lady Woodmouse went back to the palace and looked in the cupboards and under the beds, and the store stump was searched from top to bottom. "Oh dear," said Lady Daisy, "she's such a little mouse. Where can she be? What will we do?" Meanwhile, Primrose wandered along the edge of the cornfield, but she was quite unaware of her parents' concern. She'd spent the morning picking wildflowers and gazing up at the blue sky, and after a lunch of blackberries she had dozed off in the sun. She was just going to help a little group of mice that she'd seen gathering seeds in the ditch when she spotted a little round house high in the stalks of the corn. "I wonder who lives up there," she thought, and she decided to climb up and peek through one of the windows. As she looked in, she saw two pairs of bright little eyes peering back at her. "Oh, I do beg your pardon," she stammered, and she began to climb down again. "We were going to have tea," a voice called out after her. "Won't you join us?" Primrose found the tiny front door and went inside. It was very cosy, and there was thistledown carpet on the floor, and the neatly woven grass walls were covered with books and pictures. The two elderly harvest mice who lived in the house were very glad to have a visitor. They sat Primrose down and gave her a slice of cake and handed her the album of family portraits to look at. When Primrose had been shown all of their treasures, she thanked the mice politely and climbed down the ground again. She decided to walk to the edge of the chestnut woods before she went home, and some Brambly Hedge mice were still there, picking blackberries in the last of the evening sun, but they were too busy to notice her. She peered into the grasses looking for feathers and other useful things, and hidden in the brambles she discovered a very interesting hole. "I wonder if anyone lives down there," she said to herself, and she wandered into the tunnel. It was very dark inside. She could just see round the front doors set in the walls of the branching passages. As she went deeper into the tunnel, it became darker still, and soon Primrose could see nothing. "I don't think I like this place," she said with a shiver. "I'm going to go home." She turned to leave, but with so many passages leading this way and that, she had no idea where she'd come, and she picked up her skirts and she ran through the maze of tunnels. As she saw a glimmer of light and she ran towards it, the passage opened into a thick clump of brambles and briars under some tall trees, and Primrose had no idea where she was. "I can't see the oak tree," she said in a small voice, "and I can't see the willow by the stream. I think I might be lost." It was getting very dark, and big drops of rain began to fall, and they splashed through the leaves around her. Primrose huddled under a toadstool and tried not to cry. In the distance a lonely owl hooted, and the branches of the trees above creaked in the rising wind. There were little scrabbling noises in the bush quite near to Primrose, and these worried her most of all. It got darker and darker, and soon everything disappeared into the night. Primrose was trying not to think about weasels when, to her horror, she saw 5 little flickering lights coming through the woods towards her. She could just make out 5 strange figures behind them. They were shapeless and bulgy and seemed to have no heads at all. Primrose wriggled further back into the brambles, and the figures came closer and closer, and Primrose realised they were going to pass right by her hiding place. The nearer they came, the worse they looked, and she shut her eyes as she heard them pass. Only a whisker away from them she was sitting. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then she decided to be very brave and take a peep at the fifth as he went by. It walked with a limp and it had a tail and whiskers. And Mr. Apple's trousers. You see? Mr. Apple, she squeaked with delight. As each of the figures turned around, she recognised them. It was Mr. Apple, Mrs. Apple, Dusty Dogwood, and best of all, her own Mummy and Daddy. Primrose pushed her way through the brambles. Primrose, said Lady Daisy, you're safe. The harvest mice said you'd gone to the woods, and it was so dark and wet we thought we'd almost given up hope of finding you, said her father. And he picked her up and he wrapped her snugly in his cloak. Primrose was nearly asleep by the time they got home. Lady Woodmouse carried her up to her little bedroom and took off all her wet clothes, and a clean nightie was warming by the fire, and a mug of hot acorn coffee had been placed by the bed. I'll never ever go out in the field again by myself, she said. Her mummy gave her a kiss and smoothed her pillow. Let your whiskers rest your paws, pies and puddings fill the stores, sweetly dream the night away, till sunshine brings another day. She sang very softly, tucking Primrose into her comfy bed. Good night, Primrose, and good night to all of you. Night-night.